The auctioneer's gavel struck the podium like a gunshot. "Sold," he announced, his voice ringing through the crowded hall, "to the representative of A.S. Mercer and Company for the sum of £47,000. I stood at the back of the room in my emerald green silk gown, diamonds glinting at my throat, and watched the color drain from every face in the front row. They did not know me, not yet. I had made sure of that. 10 years of patience, 10 years of silence, 10 years of building an empire from the ashes of the life they had burned to the ground. But the man in the third row knew me. I could see it in the way his body went rigid, the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair, the way his sharp blue eyes, those winter sky eyes I had once loved more than my own life, found mine across the crowded auction house and went wide with a horror so complete it looked like death. "Hello, Marcus," I said quietly, and I smiled. But to understand how I came to buy my own husband's kingdom out from under him, we must go back 10 years. To a spring morning in Bristol, a bolt of sapphire silk, and the day I made the catastrophic mistake of falling in love with a duke. I was born above a fabric shop. Not the cramped, dusty kind you might imagine, but a proper establishment on Queen Street in Bristol, with wide bay windows and bolts of silk arranged like a painter's palette. My father, William Sinclair, was the finest cloth merchant in the West Country. A self-made man who had begun as an apprentice at 14 and built his business with nothing but sharp eyes, steady hands, and an iron refusal to sell anything less than perfection. My mother had died when I was 3, carried off by a fever that swept through the docks one brutal winter. I had no memory of her face, only a scent, lavender and something warm, and a feeling of being held. My father never remarried. He poured his grief into his work and his love into me. I grew up surrounded by fabric. I could identify a thread count by touch before I could read. I knew the difference between lion's silk and cheap imitation at 10 paces. I could calculate margins, negotiate with suppliers, charm difficult customers, and balance a ledger, all before my 16th birthday. I was not beautiful in the way that mattered to society. My skin was honey brown from hours spent in the shop near sun-filled windows, my hair a thick tumble of auburn curls that refused to be tamed, and my eyes were the deep, dark brown of chocolate left too long in the sun. I was strong-boned and sturdy, built for work, not for drawing rooms, but my father told me I was magnificent, and I believed him. "You have your mother's eyes," he would say, smoothing a curl behind my ear, "and my head for numbers. God help anyone who tries to cheat you, Bella." I was 19 when I first laid eyes on Lord Marcus Blackwood, the 7th Duke of Thornfield, and the man who would become both my greatest love and my most devastating enemy. He came to our shop in the spring of 1815, sent by his estate manager to purchase fabrics for the renovation of Thornfield's drawing rooms. He was 27, tall and lean with the sharp, angular features of old aristocracy, sandy blonde hair that fell across his forehead, and blue eyes so pale and clear they looked like chips of winter sky. He moved with the easy authority of a man born to command. But there was something restless in him, a searching quality, as if he had misplaced something vital and could not quite remember what it was. He spent 3 hours in our shop that first day. He did not need 3 hours. He needed perhaps 40 minutes to select the damask and the brocade. But he stayed, asking questions, watching me work, listening as I explained the difference between Indian muslin and French cambric, the way certain dyes faded in sunlight, the reason why the most expensive silk was not always the best. "You know more about this than anyone I have ever met," he said, leaning against the counter with an expression that was half surprise, half fascination. "I should hope so," I replied, cutting a length of sapphire silk with a single clean stroke. "It is my life's work." He smiled then. It was a real smile, not the polished social performance I would later learn he wore like armor. It reached his eyes and crinkled the corners and transformed his severe aristocratic face into something unexpectedly warm. He came back the next week, and the week after, he stopped pretending he needed fabric. My father watched this courtship with the wariness of a man who understood the world's cruelties. "He is a duke, Bella," he said one evening, his voice careful. "Dukes do not marry merchants' daughters, not in this world." "Then perhaps this world needs changing," I said. My father looked at me with an expression I did not fully understand until years later. It was not disapproval. It was fear. Marcus proposed on a Thursday afternoon in the back room of our shop, surrounded by bolts of cloth and the smell of sizing. He did not kneel. He stood before me, took both my hands in his and said, "I do not care about your birth. I do not care about your fortune. I care that you are the only person in my entire life who has told me the truth without flinching. Marry me, Arabella, make my world honest. I said yes before he finished speaking. I should have listened to my father. The wedding was small and private, held in the chapel at Thornfield with only a handful of witnesses. Marcus's mother, the Dowager Duchess Catherine, did not attend. She sent a note instead. 3 words written in a hand as sharp and black as iron filings. This is unacceptable. I first met Catherine Blackwood on the morning after my wedding, when she swept into the breakfast room like a winter storm. She was a tall, skeletal woman of 55, with silver white hair pulled back in rigid curls that framed a face of extraordinary, terrifying beauty. Her eyes were the same ice blue as her son's, but where Marcus's held warmth beneath the frost, Catherine's held nothing at all. She wore black, head to toe, though her husband had been dead for 15 years. The jet jewelry at her throat caught the light like fragments of midnight. She looked at me the way one might look at a stain on fine linen. So, she said, her voice carrying the precise clipped tones of old money. You are the shopkeeper. I am the Duchess of Thornfield, I replied, meeting her gaze, and I am pleased to meet you. Something flickered behind those icy eyes. Not respect, exactly, recognition. She had expected me to crumble. I had not. And Catherine Blackwood, I would learn, never forgot a slight. The campaign began immediately. It was subtle at first, so subtle I almost missed it. A comment at dinner about the proper way to hold a fish fork, a correction of my pronunciation in front of guests. An invitation to a society luncheon that arrived mysteriously. One day after the event, a new gown ordered for me from London that was, when it arrived, 2 sizes too small and in a shade of yellow that made my skin look sallow. You must not take it personally, Marcus said when I raised these incidents. We were walking in the gardens at Thornfield, the last of the spring roses still clinging to the stone wall. Mother is set in her ways. She will come around. She will not, I said. She does not want to come around. She wants me gone. Marcus frowned. You are being dramatic, Arabella. I was not being dramatic. I was being precise. But I did not argue. I had learned from my father that the most dangerous thing in business was to make your opponent aware of your strategy before you were ready to execute it, so I did what I had always done. I worked. I learned Thornfield. I learned its rhythms and its secrets. I learned the names of every servant, every tenant, every field and forest and stream. I learned the accounts, which were in far worse shape than Marcus knew. His father had been reckless with money, and Catherine's lifestyle, the London seasons, the jewels, the endless redecoration of rooms that did not need redecorating was bleeding the estate dry. I said nothing about the accounts. Not yet. I filed the knowledge away like a merchant files invoices, carefully, precisely, knowing that one day it would be needed for 6 months. I was happy. Not perfectly happy, not the uncomplicated happiness of my girlhood, but happy enough. Marcus was kind. He was attentive. In private, he was tender in a way that surprised me, as if my presence had unlocked a room in him that had been shut for years. But Catherine was always there, always watching, always whispering, and then the letter arrived. I did not see the letter. I was not meant to see it. It was delivered to Marcus's study by Catherine herself on an October morning when the first frost had turned Thornfield's grounds to glass. I learned what it contained only when Marcus came to our bedroom that evening with a face like carved stone. "Who is he?" he asked. His voice was quiet. That was worse than shouting. Marcus quiet was Marcus dangerous. "Who is who?" I was sitting at my dressing table, brushing my hair. I could see his reflection in the mirror, standing behind me, rigid as a soldier. The man you have been writing to, the man whose letters you have been hiding. I turned to face him. "Marcus, I have no idea what you're talking about." He held up a letter. I reached for it, but he pulled it back. "Do not insult me by denying it. Mother found this in your dressing room, a love letter from a man named Daniel Cross." Daniel Cross, the name meant nothing to me. I had never heard it in my life. "I have never written to any Daniel Cross," I said, my voice steady despite the ice spreading through my chest. "I have never received a letter from him. Your mother is lying." "My mother," Marcus said, and his voice cracked on the word, "has never lied to me." I stared at him. This man, this brilliant, complicated, deeply flawed man was looking at me with the eyes of a judge who had already decided the verdict, and in that moment, I understood something terrible. He would always believe her. Not because the evidence was convincing, not because I had given him reason to doubt, but because she was his mother, and I was a merchant's daughter, and in the deepest, most unexamined corner of his aristocratic heart, he believed that people like me were capable of betrayal in ways that people like her were not. Ask me to swear on anything, I said, on our marriage, on my father's grave, on the child I am carrying. His eyes dropped to my stomach. Something shifted in his face, something raw and desperate. But before it could take hold, the door opened and Catherine walked in. She did not knock. She never knocked. "The servants are talking," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "The stable hand, Cross, has already fled. There is no point in prolonging this humiliation, Marcus. Every day she remains under this roof is another day our name is dragged through mud." She looked at me, and she smiled. A small, precise, triumphant smile. "Throw her out," Catherine said. "She is worthless." Marcus closed his eyes. When he opened them, the warmth was gone. The searching quality I had loved, the restless, hungry intelligence that had found its answer in me. All of it had been replaced by something cold and final. "Leave," he said, "tonight. Marcus, I am carrying your child. Leave tonight." I stood in the rain outside Thornfield's gates at 10 o'clock on an October night, wearing a dress I had sewn myself and carrying nothing but a small bag of clothes and the 7 pounds I had hidden in my petticoat lining. Behind me, the windows of the great house blazed with light. Ahead of me, the road stretched into darkness. I was 19 years old. I was pregnant. I was alone, and I was not worthless. I whispered it to the rain, to the darkness, to the child growing inside me. I am not worthless, and one day, they will know it. The coaching inn at Harrogate was a gray, cheerless place that smelled of damp wool and old beer. I arrived there half frozen, having walked 4 miles in the rain, and paid 6 pence for a room that was barely larger than a cupboard. I wrote to my father. The letter came back unopened, marked adresse unknown. I learned the truth weeks later from a Bristol merchant I encountered by chance at a market. My father's business had collapsed. His suppliers had withdrawn, one by one, citing concerns about his reputation. His creditors had called in their debts simultaneously, as if orchestrated. He had died of a heart attack in his empty shop, surrounded by unsold cloth, 3 weeks after my wedding. Catherine, it had to be Catherine. She had not only removed me, she had destroyed my entire world, root and branch, so that I would have nowhere to return to. I gave birth to Thomas in a rented room above a chandler's shop in Plymouth, attended by a midwife who smelled of gin and charged me 3 shillings I could not afford. The labor lasted 14 hours. I screamed into a pillow so as not to disturb the other tenants. When it was over, and the midwife placed my son in my arms, I looked at his face, red and crumpled and furious with the indignity of being born, and I saw Marcus's eyes, those sharp ice-blue eyes staring up at me from a tiny, perfect face framed by damp auburn curls. "Thomas," I said, "your name is Thomas, and you will never, ever know what it feels like to be thrown away." The first year was the hardest. I worked as a seamstress, sewing shirts for a haberdasher who paid me barely enough to eat. I mended clothes I took in washing. I did anything and everything. My fingers raw and bleeding, my back aching, my son sleeping in a drawer lined with cotton scraps because I could not afford a cradle. But I was my father's daughter, and my father had built an empire from nothing. I began to notice things. The shipping ledgers at the haberdasher's shop left open on the counter, the inefficiencies in the supply chain, the absurd markups charged by middlemen who added no value, the opportunities that everyone else was too blind or too lazy to see. I started small. I negotiated a better price on cotton from a supplier who was desperate to sell. I undercut the haberdasher by 10% and offered better quality. I saved every penny, ate every meal standing up, and slept 4 hours a night. By the end of the second year, I had 12 pounds saved. By the end of the third, I had 50. By the end of the fourth, I had 200 and a plan. We will take a very short break. If you do not want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Now, let us continue, because the rise is about to begin. I could not trade under my own name. A woman alone, with no family and no connections, would be dismissed, cheated, and destroyed by the all-male merchant establishment before she sold her first bolt of cloth. So I became someone else. A.S. Mercer. The initials stood for Arabella Sinclair, the surname I borrowed from a ship I had seen in Plymouth Harbor, its name painted in faded gold letters on a hull that had seen better days. It seemed fitting. I, too, had seen better days. Mr. James Hartwell was the first person to take A.S. Mercer seriously. He was a solicitor with offices above a bookshop in Exeter. A calm, shrewd man of 45 with round spectacles, neat brown hair going gray at the temples, and kind brown eyes that missed nothing. I walked into his office on a Tuesday morning, placed my business plan on his desk, and waited. He read it twice. Then he looked up at me over his spectacles. "This is either brilliant or insane," he said. "It is both," I replied. "That is why it will work." My plan was simple in concept and audacious in execution. The East India Company controlled the spice and silk trade, but their monopoly was weakening. Independent traders were beginning to make inroads, buying directly from suppliers in Calcutta and Canton, bypassing the company's inflated prices. What they lacked was a distribution network in England, someone who could receive the goods, warehouse them, and sell them to retailers at competitive prices. I would be that someone. I would be the bridge between the ships and the shops. Hartwell stared at me for a long time. "You will need capital," he said. "I have £200. You will need 10 times that. Then help me find investors, present them with the numbers. They do not need to know who A.S. Mercer is. They only need to know that A.S. Mercer will make them rich." He did. And I did. Within 2 years, A.S. Mercer and Company had 3 warehouses, 14 employees, and contracts with suppliers in India, China, and the Spice Islands. Within 5 years, we had a fleet of 6 merchant ships, offices in London, Bristol, and Liverpool, and an annual revenue that would have made my father weep with pride. I was 26 years old, and I was one of the wealthiest merchants in England, and not a single person in the aristocracy knew my name. Thomas grew up in a world of ledgers and dockyards and the smell of cinnamon and tea. He was a beautiful boy, quick and kind, with his father's blue eyes and my auburn curls. He called me Mama and believed his father was a merchant who had died at sea. It was the only lie I ever told him, and it ate at me like acid. "When will you tell him the truth?" Hartwell asked me one evening, over brandy in his office. "When I'm ready," I said, "when I have something to show him besides the story of how his mother was thrown out like rubbish." "And when will that be?" I looked at him. "When I own Thornfield." Hartwell set down his glass. "You're not serious." I have never been more serious about anything in my life. I had kept watch on the Ashworth estate, though I could hardly bear to think about it. Hartwell's contacts, quiet inquiries, discreet investigations had painted a picture of steady, inexorable decline. Catherine's spending had not slowed. If anything, it had accelerated, fueled by a desperate need to maintain appearances. The London seasons, the jewels, the renovations, the elaborate dinners for people she wanted to impress, it was all being funded by debt. And Marcus had retreated into himself. He managed the estate with a mechanical joylessness, signing papers and attending meetings but contributing nothing. He had not remarried. He had not taken a mistress. He had, by all accounts, simply stopped living. The reports said he spent most evenings alone in his study, drinking brandy and staring at the fire. Part of me, a small, stubborn part that I could not kill no matter how hard I tried, ached for him. The rest of me waited. In the autumn of 1825, Thornfield Estate was declared insolvent. The creditors moved in. An auction was scheduled for December. I instructed Hartwell to register A.S. Mercer and Company as a bidder. "This will be the largest single property acquisition in the county this year," Hartwell said, looking at me with those shrewd, careful eyes. "People will ask questions. Let them ask," I said. "I will be there to answer them." I spent 3 weeks preparing for the auction the way a general prepares for battle. I had a gown made, not by any seamstress, but by the finest modiste in London, a woman who dressed duchesses and princesses and the mistresses of kings. It was emerald green silk, the color of money, the color of power, cut in the latest fashion with a bodice that gleamed like armor. I ordered diamonds for my throat and my ears. I had my hair styled by the same woman who dressed Lady Castlereagh. I looked in the mirror and saw not the girl who had been thrown out in the rain, but the woman who had crawled out of the ashes and built a throne of her own. Thomas would come with me. He was 10 now, tall for his age, with those startling blue eyes and a quiet confidence that reminded me so painfully of his father that sometimes I had to look away. "Where are we going, Mama?" he asked, watching me dress. "To buy a house," I said. "It must be a very grand house," he observed, eyeing the diamonds. "It is," I said. "It belonged to your father." He stared at me. "My father?" "But you said—" I know what I said. I knelt before him and took his hands. "And now I am going to tell you the truth, all of it, because you deserve the truth, Thomas, and because what happens today will change our lives, and you need to understand why." I told him everything: the shop in Bristol, the Duke, the love that was real, and the lies that destroyed it, the rain, the £7, the drawer he slept in as a baby. The empire I built from nothing while the world thought I was dead. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Is he a good man? Thomas asked finally. My father? I thought about this carefully. He was a weak man who did a terrible thing, but I believe there is goodness in him. I believe he was lied to, and he chose to believe the lie because the truth was too difficult. And the grandmother? The one who threw you out? She is a cruel woman who cares more about her name than about people. Thomas nodded slowly. Then let us go and buy the house, Mama. I kissed his forehead. My brave, magnificent boy. The auction was held at the County Assembly Rooms in Newcastle, a grand cold building with columns and echoes. The room was packed. Thornfield was one of the largest estates in the county, and its sale had drawn every landowner, speculator, and gossip within 50 miles. I arrived late, deliberately. I wanted every eye in the room to find me as I walked through the doors. And they did. The emerald gown was doing its work. The diamonds caught the winter light from the tall windows and scattered it like stars. My hair, styled in elaborate Regency curls, gleamed with auburn fire. I walked with the measured, unhurried confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. I did not look at Marcus. Not yet. I could feel his presence the way you feel a storm approaching. A change in the air, a tightening of the skin. I took my seat in the back row. Hartwell sat beside me, his leather case of documents on his lap, his face betraying nothing. The auctioneer began. Thornfield Estate, comprising the main house, 1,200 acres, 3 tenant farms, a home, wood, stables, and all contents. Starting bid, £30,000. Bidding was brisk at first. A London speculator offered 32. A neighboring landowner countered with 35. A representative of a banking house went to 38. I waited. At 40,000, the room began to thin. At 43, the London speculator dropped out. At 45, only the banking house remained. I raised my hand. £47,000, I said. My voice was clear and steady, the voice of a woman who has addressed suppliers and investors and dock workers and kings. The room went silent. £47,000 was an extraordinary sum. It was more than the estate was worth on paper. It was a statement, not a bid. The banking house representative looked at his papers, looked at me and shook his head. The gavel fell. Sold to the representative of A.S. Mercer and Company. For £47,000, I stood. The room was watching me with the hungry, fascinated eyes of people witnessing something they did not quite understand. I walked to the front of the room, past the speculator, past the banker, past the rows of curious faces. I stopped in front of Marcus. He was sitting in the third row, wearing a dark coat that hung loosely on his frame. He had aged. The sandy hair was threaded with gray. The sharp angles of his face were sharper still, honed by a decade of guilt and grief. His blue eyes, those winter sky eyes that I had loved, that I had seen replicated in my son's face every single day for 10 years, were staring at me with an expression that defied description. "Hello, Marcus," I said. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. "You do not recognize me?" I kept my voice light, conversational, as if we were meeting at a garden party and not at the funeral of his legacy. "Perhaps this will help. The last time you saw me, I was wearing a wet cotton dress and carrying 7 pounds in my petticoat. You told me to leave. Your mother told you I was worthless." The word hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. "Arabella," he whispered. "Arabella." Behind him, I heard a sharp intake of breath. Catherine. She was sitting 1 row back, in her eternal black, her face a mask of ice that was beginning to crack. "This is impossible," Catherine said, rising to her feet. Her voice was high and thin. "This is a trick. This woman is no one. She is a merchant's daughter. She is nothing." I turned to face her. The woman who had destroyed my father, the woman who had forged the letter, the woman who had looked at me with those cold blue eyes and said, "Throw her out." "Nothing," I repeated, tasting the word. "You called me nothing. You called me worthless. You threw me into the rain with your grandchild in my belly and you went back to your dinner." I reached into my reticule and drew out a document. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately letting the silence build. "This is the deed to Thornfield Estate," I said. "It bears the name A.S. Mercer and Company. My company. My name is Arabella Sinclair Mercer. I own 6 merchant ships, 3 warehouses, and contracts across 4 continents. I employ over 200 people. My annual revenue exceeds what this estate has earned in the last decade." I laid the deed on the table in front of Marcus. "You threw me out with nothing," I said. "I built an empire. and now I own the very ground you stand on." Catherine's face had gone the color of curdled milk. "Marcus," she hissed, "Marcus, do something." But Marcus was not looking at his mother. He was looking at me, and in his eyes I saw something I had not expected, not anger, not defiance, not the cold, final judgment of the man who had cast me out. Grief. Raw, bottomless, drowning grief. "The letter," he said, his voice barely audible. "The letter from Daniel Cross." "There was no Daniel Cross," I said. "There was never a Daniel Cross. Your mother forged that letter to remove me from your life, just as she destroyed my father's business to ensure I had nowhere to run." I drew out a second document. A report compiled by Hartwell over 7 years of investigation, witness statements, handwriting analysis, financial records showing payments from Catherine to the suppliers who had abandoned my father. "The proof," I said, "is here. Every lie, every manipulation, every shilling she spent to destroy an innocent man," and his daughter Marcus took the document. His hands were shaking. He read it. He read it again. And then he looked at his mother with an expression that made even Catherine take a step back. "Is this true?" he asked. His voice was very quiet. Catherine said nothing. Her silence was the loudest sound in the room. "Is this true?" "I did what was necessary." Catherine snapped, her composure finally shattering. "I did what was needed to protect this family from contamination. She was beneath us. Her father was a tradesman. Her blood was common. I will not apologize for protecting the Blackwood name." "You destroyed an innocent man," Marcus said. "You killed her father. You forged a letter. You made me throw out my wife, my pregnant wife, into the rain. And I would do it again," Catherine spat. "Every single part of it." The magistrate who had been standing by the door, invited by Hartwell as a precaution, stepped forward. "Lady Catherine Blackwood, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to cause financial ruin." They led her away. She did not scream. She walked out with her spine straight, and her chin high, and her ice-blue eyes fixed on nothing. She did not look at me. She did not look at Marcus. She walked out of the room and out of our lives, and I never saw her again. The room emptied slowly. People filed out in stunned silence, whispering, staring, trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. I remained standing at the front, the deed still on the table, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might shatter my ribs. Marcus had not moved. He sat in his chair, the investigation report in his hands, staring at the pages without seeing them. "Arabella," he said finally. I cannot." "I know," I said. "I threw you out in the rain. You were carrying my child and I threw you out." "Yes." I believed her. I believed every word. I did not even ask for proof. I did not even give you a chance to. His voice broke. He pressed his fist against his mouth, his shoulders shaking. I watched him cry. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, in my darkest hours, in those early years of poverty and exhaustion. I had dreamed of watching Marcus Blackwood weep and feeling triumph, vindication, the sweet, cold satisfaction of revenge. But standing there watching the man I had loved fall apart, I did not feel triumph. I felt something far more complicated and far more painful. I felt compassion for a weak man who had been destroyed by a strong woman's cruelty. "There is someone you should meet," I said. I turned to the doorway and nodded.
Thomas walked in.
He was wearing his best coat, navy blue, with a white cravat tied neatly at his throat. His auburn curls were combed but defiant. His blue eyes, those unmistakable Blackwood blue eyes, swept the room and found his father. Marcus looked at the boy. The boy looked at Marcus, and in the space between them, 10 years of absence condensed into a single unbearable moment. "Thomas," I said quietly, "this is your father." Marcus stood. His legs nearly gave way. He gripped the chair for support, staring at this boy. His boy, this child he had never known, never held, never watched take his first steps or speak his first words. "You have your mother's hair," Marcus said. It was such a small, strange, broken thing to say that it made Thomas smile. "And your eyes?" Thomas replied. "Everyone says so." Marcus let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if afraid that this too might be taken from him. Thomas looked at me. I nodded. My son walked across the room and extended his hand. "How do you do, sir?" Marcus took the small hand in both of his and held it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "I am," he said, his voice thick. "I am so very sorry." "Mama says you were lied to," Thomas said, with the devastating directness of a 10-year-old. She says you did a terrible thing, but you're not entirely a terrible person. Marcus laughed through his tears. Your mother is far more generous than I deserve. Yes, Thomas agreed. She usually is. 2 years later. The spring of 1827 came to Thornfield like a promise kept. The gardens, neglected for a decade, had been restored. The roses that Marcus's grandmother had planted 50 years ago bloomed again. Pink and white and deep crimson, climbing the south wall in a riot of color and scent. The fields were plowed and planted. The tenant farms were repaired. The chimneys breathed strong, confident smoke. I stood at the window of the master bedroom, the room that had once been Catherine's, and looked out at the grounds that bore my name on their deed. Marcus was in the garden below, kneeling in the dirt, planting something with Thomas beside him. They were arguing about the proper depth for rose bushes, a debate that Thomas was winning with the calm, evidence-based reasoning of a boy who had grown up watching his mother destroy men in boardrooms. Marcus had spent 2 years earning his way back. Not as the Duke. The title was his, but the estate was mine, and I had made it clear from the first day that ownership and title were two very different things. He worked. He managed the tenants, repaired the fences, learned the accounts. He did it without complaint, without resentment, with a quiet, dogged determination that was, I had to admit, not unlike my own. He did not ask me to forgive him. He did not beg. He simply showed up every single day and did the work. Forgiveness came slowly, not as a single moment, but as a series of small, accumulated truths. The way he remembered how I took my tea, the way he read to Thomas every evening without being asked, the way he stood in my father's rebuilt shop in Bristol, which I had restored as a memorial, and wept for a man he had never met. We remarried in June in the same village church where we had first exchanged vows 12 years earlier. I wore a gown of ivory silk that I had cut and sewn myself. Thomas stood beside his father as witness. Hartwell dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief and pretended he was not crying. That evening, after the guests had gone and Thomas was asleep, Marcus found me in the study. I was sitting at the desk, the deed to Thornfield spread before me. Arabella, he said from the doorway, I want to ask you something. Ask. Will you put the estate in both our names? I looked at him. This man who had thrown me out with 7 pounds and a broken heart. This man who had spent 2 years planting roses and mending fences and learning how to be worthy of a second chance. No, I said. His face fell. The estate stays in my name, I said, and in Thomas's name after me. That is not negotiable. He nodded slowly. I understand. But, I said, and I reached into the desk drawer and drew out a small velvet box. I had this made for you. He opened it. Inside was a gold signet ring, engraved with the Blackwood crest on one side and the Sinclair merchant's mark on the other. 2 families, 2 histories, intertwined. We are partners, I said, not because of your title and not because of my money, because we chose each other again, knowing everything. He slid the ring onto his finger. His eyes, those winter blue eyes that I had loved and hated and loved again, glistened. I will spend the rest of my life, he said, trying to deserve this. Good, I said, then let us begin. I looked out the window. The sun was setting over Thornfield, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The house was warm. My son was sleeping. My husband was beside me. And the deed to the estate, every acre, every stone, every blade of grass, bore my name. Arabella Sinclair Mercer. Not worthless, not nothing, not ever again. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. Was it the moment she was thrown into the rain? Was it the auction reveal? Or was it when Thomas shook his father's hand? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more stories of revenge, royalty, and redemption, hit that subscribe button and the bell. We release new stories every single day. Until next time, remember, the quiet ones are always the most dangerous.